Hi everyone, it's Katie from Chords Records. This video is all about live performances by jazz musicians and artists. And I'm going to take you through 10 in my collection, 10 live jazz performances. And they're not the usual ones you'd think of, like, live at the Village Vanguard. You will know the artists, but I think these ones are a little on that kind of lesser scale, lesser known. And it's real. Doing this video has really got me thinking about the relationship between live recording and the evolution of live recording and jazz music. It must have been one of the big genres kind of coming up in the 40s and 50s with bebop and swing, and being recorded and being able to disseminate that out to music fans, and particularly musicians who were influenced by hearing those live recordings. I do wonder, without this kind of these live performances being recorded, how jazz musicians would have evolved so quickly over those kind of crucial 20 or 30 years. I just find it really fascinating, this kind of intrinsic relationship between jazz and live performances. And thank God so many of them were recorded. I mean, there's absolutely thousands. But in this video, I'm going to just pick 10. And please let me know below your favourite lesser known, great recorded jazz performances. I absolutely love jazz, but I'm not a sort of expert by any means. I have a lot in my collection, but I know so many of you know way more than I do. So please put it in the comments below. Right, and if you like this video, I'd really appreciate a like, and even better, a subscribe. Thanks very much. So the first one I'm going to show is the iconic jazz pianist Earl Hindes. This album, Earl Hindes in Paris, I picked up for $8, and that's 8 Australian dollars, which is about $5 US. This was recorded late in his career, around 1970. So this guy was born, I think, around 1905. Like he was into his late 60s, maybe even late 60s when he recorded this. So he was really coming into the end of his career. But if you don't know Earl Hindes, and of course you do, he is one of the most influential jazz pianists, and influenced so many of the jazz pianists that we know and love. He was one of the first to have a kind of a orchestral or a head of a jazz orchestra. But this particular album, recorded in Paris in 1970, is just fantastic and one of the biggest surprises in this collection. So not many people have this, not many people know about it. It is such a great album, and he was as good as ever. It's swinging bebop. He is just a master. So if you can pick it up, I highly recommend this one, Earl Hindes in Paris. So that's the first one. Now I'm going to continue the Paris theme for a little while, and the next one is just one of my favorite albums of all time, let alone favorite jazz recordings. It's The Great Show of Nina Simone, live in Paris. This one was one of the original French presses, recorded on this festival disc. I don't know how to say that in French. Disque festival label. And it was recorded in 1968 in Paris. And so we all know who Nina Simone is. And this era of Nina Simone, 1968, it was right in the heart of the civil rights kind of era, sort of that mid-60s to early 70s. And of course, she was at the heart of the civil rights movement. She'd had her kind of her peak era in the early 60s, and as we all know, she had a very troubled life, suffering from severe mental illness, as we now know, and we now could have called it out, and she probably would have had better treatment. But this is quite a special album, and the recording is absolutely beautiful. So she'd had a bit of a break and she was coming back, and it's quite a quintessential Paris concert. It's Montreux. And the really beautiful timing of this, the special thing about this album is that it was recorded only weeks after Martin Luther King had been assassinated, and who she was a friend of, and who she actually wrote a beautiful song the day after he was assassinated. She doesn't sing it on this album, so I'm not quite sure. She recorded this about 2 months after he was assassinated. But the recording of this is beautiful. But it's a double album. But on side 1, track 4, Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood, is one of the best versions I have of that song. It is just fantastic. She doesn't really show any vulnerability in this album. It's just beautiful Nina Simone. So that is The Great Show of Nina Simone live in Paris from 1968. So that's an original French press. Okay, the next album I have isn't keeping with the Paris theme for a couple more. This is the most recent Paris album a most recent jazz live performance album I'm going to talk about. And it's because it's one of my all-time favourites. Diana Krall live in Paris. I know this album off by heart. ORG, this is the limited edition, mastered by Bernie Grundman from original analog tapes, pressed at RTI, audiophile quality. It is whisper quiet, my version. So this was from 2002. Again, it's a 45 RPM, so it's a double album. This is just a swinging band. So we have Anthony Wilson on guitar, John Clayton on bass, Jeff Hamilton on drums. So this album, absolutely supreme. It probably doesn't fall into the unknown live jazz albums, but I couldn't leave it out. Once I started thinking about Paris live jazz albums, I had to include it. Right, the next one in the final of my 4 Paris albums is this fantastic Vinyl Me Please pressing of Thelonious Monk, Paris 1969. One of the best things about this is the actual packaging. So it's this really heavy stock, a beautiful, beautiful card. It's not. This one wasn't a numbered one, but it's from the VMP Classics series, and I love this. At the time, people were a little bit unsure about it, but I play this semi-regularly, and it's so great to have new releases, right? All these fantastic new jazz releases, because they're so whisper quiet. But I absolutely love this one. Of course, he was 1969, sort of very much kind of towards the end of his really greatness, and it's just such a fantastic recording. So if you can pick this up, I think you can probably pick it up quite cheaply. I highly recommend it, just as part of the collection if you're a Monk fan or a Live in Paris fan or a live jazz fan. It's great. Right, the next kind of groupings of live jazz recordings that I'm going to talk about are from Carnegie Hall. Now, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of live at Carnegie Hall recordings. I have chosen 3 specifically, which I just love in my collection. I've got a lot more, but I thought these ones would be quite a good one for this particular 10 jazz live recordings you need to hear. The first one's a Verve, recorded on the Verve, and it's the Essential Billie Holiday Carnegie Hall concert recorded live. This is an interesting album. So this was recorded this is my original Australian press of this. This was recorded in 1956 and is absolutely fascinating. So Billie Holiday, of course, died, I think, in 1959. And this particular recording that they put out includes a fascinating... when you went to this concert, there was a gentleman who was reading out of Billie Holiday's autobiography. And so interspersed between the songs is this kind of male voice who must have been at the concert reading excerpts out of Billie's autobiography, and then it goes into one of the songs from the actual concert. I would like to have a version of the album without those readings, but it adds a really contextual kind of element, an autobiographical element, and it can be a bit jarring because you've got this kind of older man reading about this woman's life. I wonder why they didn't get a woman to read it. But anyway, the actual concert itself is just beautifully recorded. The liner notes are great, and actually the liner notes are by the gentleman who did that audio recording. His name was Gilbert Milstein. So really fantastic, and my quality is just so beautiful. It was an original Australian press, which I was lucky to pick up really cheaply, and it's pretty clean. So that's my first Carnegie Hall one. The second one is Dave Brubeck, and this is an original Canadian press that I picked up. This was recorded in 1963, and it's quite a famous recording. And one of the things I love about this actual vinyl release is this kind of excerpt, this liner notes on the front of the album. It doesn't happen often. I really quite like it. It's a lot easier to read, and it gives you immediate indication of the album. But the story, the liner notes talk about, it's written by someone who was at the concert. It was a music journalist who was there to review it and actually knew the musicians and had seen them several times. And he talks about, how Dave Brubeck obviously performed live all the time, and he was sitting down just to see another Dave Brubeck live. And by the fourth song, people knew it was something special. And they were swinging, and musicians actually said, Dave Brubeck actually said that they often, had these amazing moments where they really got into a groove, but it was never recorded. And on this occasion it was. So this is a fantastic recording, the Dave Brubeck Quartet at Carnegie Hall. And then my final, that's on the Columbia 2i. That was a Canadian press. And then my final Carnegie Hall, and my seventh album in these 10 unusual, sort of interesting jazz live performances, is Ella Fitzgerald Newport Jazz Festival live at Carnegie Hall. They sometimes did these outlier concerts. Oh my goodness. This was my Australian original as well. This was recorded in 1973, so very much well into the end of her career. And she was reuniting with members of her band from the 40s and the mid-30s even. Like, really amazing. They all came back and they all played with her. And it is such a great, great album. It's a gatefold album. And I just love this outfit she's wearing. It's so 70s. And you can see some of the songs on there. The second song on here is one of my favourite songs ever, Good Morning Heartache. But she does these medleys, Don't Worry About Me, These Foolish Things, A Tisket, a Tasket, I've Got a Crush on You. She does a few medleys, but it's just so brilliant. So that is a really great Ella live album to get, and probably not as well known as some of her others. Okay, so now we're going to move into sort of a final kind of grouping of jazz albums. The first one's semi-related to Newport, although it wasn't at Carnegie Hall, it was at Newport, and it's the Miles and Monk at Newport. It's a album of two sides, two parts, two separate performances. One with the Miles Davis Sextet featuring John Coltrane and Cannonball Adderley, so classic. And then Thelonious Monk Quartet with Pee Wee Russell. This is hard bop, particularly the Miles. It goes off, like you have to be in the mood for it. But I collect Newport records, and so this is a really good one for that kind of sub-collection, sub-genre, but it's also a really fantastic live jazz performance. Live jazz, just recorded live jazz, can capture some really spontaneous moments that being in the studio sometimes doesn't, although live recordings, jazz recordings are often recorded in one take. So I just love live jazz recordings if you haven't picked that up. So this particular copy of mine was also an original. I'm very lucky. All right. And then two more to go. The next one is from the series of the label Lost Recordings. I've spoken about them before. I'm going to take this out of its packaging because it needs to be seen to be believed. So this is Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. The covers are stunning. Look at that gold reflection. It's so beautiful. They're usually always gatefolds, great liner notes. And you put this on, you wouldn't even know you were playing an album. You'd think you were playing a digital recording, a CD or streaming. There is not a single sound that comes out of this before the music starts playing. It is so silent. This is one of my favourite Art Blakey albums and one of my favourite live jazz recordings I have. I have about 4 or 5 of these lost recordings. So they usually come out numbered first, a limited edition of about 2000, and then they release them unnumbered. And this particular one's an unnumbered, but the same recording, the same mastering. They're just fantastic. So that one was nice. This is a one in. It's called Live in. Don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right. Live in Scheveningen. Someone in Germany might be able to help me. I think it was Germany, or maybe Live in Scheveningen, 1958. So, and then the final one is a very unusual one, and you have to really be kind of curious about female jazz musicians to have this. It's a little kind of subgenre again that I collect because unfortunately back in the day there were a few famous female jazz musicians, mainly vocalists, but the actual musicians themselves, they're obviously pianists, the Nina Simones of the world, but few just great jazz musicians that were women. And this is Trudy Pitz. And this is recorded live at Club Baron in 1968. and this is my original Prestige, and it's just got a vibe, like it's a sort of almost a cocktail bar, vibe. It's just beautiful. And she was an amazing organ player. So not that well known, and I don't even know if this has been re-released, if at all, or that many times. It was on Prestige. And so that's it. My 10 jazz live recordings that you need to hear. I hope you enjoyed this. As I said, please put some of your recommendations down below. See you next time.